Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed listeners, today we explore a timeless theme. He fell for the fire in her eyes. But before we plunge into the emotional depths of love, let us first consider this through the lens of Stoic philosophy, a philosophy that teaches us to live harmoniously with both the internal and external forces of the world. When he looked into her eyes, it was not mere infatuation he experienced. It was not the restless hunger that blinds, but a moment of startling clarity. There was fire in her gaze, but it was not a fire that scorched or consumed. It was ordered, alive, deliberate. It was a fire that revealed, not destroyed. And in that flame, he saw something that aligned with the deepest teachings of reason, the Stoic concept of logos. Logos is the rational principle that orders the universe, the divine intelligence that moves the stars and guides the seasons. It is the same principle that the Stoics believed resides within each of us, in the form of reason and moral capacity. To live in accordance with nature, they said, is to live in accordance with logos. Her eyes, then, held more than just allure. They held a burning awareness of purpose, a light not of chaos but of clarity. He was drawn to that fire not because it was untamed, but because it was meaningful. In her gaze, he sensed not a fleeting passion, but a focused intensity, a mind aligned with purpose, a soul not merely reacting to life, but shaping it. It challenged him, awakened in him a need to rise, not to possess her, but to become worthy of the clarity she carried. In that moment, he understood what the Stoics meant when they said that external things are indifferent, but some have value in their proper context. Her fire was one such thing, not to be chased blindly, but to be respected and understood. Her passion was not just personal, it was philosophical. It carried the same sacred energy the Stoics believed we all must cultivate, a devotion to truth, a discipline of desire, a will to act in harmony with what is just. It was not merely her intensity that moved him, it was the alignment of that intensity with reason. Her fire wasn't noise, it was music, and he, long dulled by distractions and detachment, heard the call to tune himself accordingly. Many fall for beauty and are lost in it, but he fell for something else. He fell for the signal in the flame, for the structure within the storm. Her fire reminded him of the inner fire Stoicism speaks of, the one we are called to tend and protect. It is the fire of courage, of principle, of living in alignment with virtue, even when the world burns around us. In her, he saw not a tempest, but a torch, lit by wisdom, carried with strength, aimed with intention. And so his attraction was not the kind that drags the soul into dependence. It was the kind that uplifts the soul toward its highest potential. She didn't offer escape, she offered encounter. She didn't blur reality, she sharpened it. That is why he fell, not into confusion, but into deeper awareness. He was not seeking her to complete him, nor did she demand to be placed at the center of his universe. Instead, her presence illuminated the universe already within him, the order, the discipline, the clarity waiting to be lived. In that fire, he saw a reminder of what the Stoics have always known, that passion is not the enemy when it flows in harmony with reason. That love, when it reflects logos, becomes not a threat to virtue, but a companion to it. And so he fell, not foolishly, but freely, into the warmth of a gaze that reflected not only her soul, but the shared flame of a reasoned, awakened life. To love is not merely to feel, it is to be tested. It is easy to speak of affection in the warmth of early days, when hearts race and the world glows in the light of infatuation. But the Stoics teach that virtue is revealed not in ease, but in adversity. And so, when he fell for the fire in her eyes, what awaited him was not only a stirring of the heart, but a quiet summons to examine the quality of his soul. Love, in its truest form, is not indulgence. It is discipline, not restraint in the cold sense, but discipline as an active expression of care. Care for oneself, for the beloved, and for the virtue that must govern both. The Stoics would say, what is love if it does not strengthen us? If it makes us less patient, more needy, more reactive, then it is not love. It is attachment, confusion, desire unmoored from reason. But if it sharpens us, humbles us, reminds us daily of our impermanence and our need to live rightly, then it is something sacred. To fall for her was not to be swept away. It was to be confronted with the necessity of character. Her presence, so vivid, so alive, did not allow room for pretense. Her fire lit up everything, his hopes, his flaws, his limits. It was in her company that he discovered how impatient he could be, how easily pride crept in, how often he wished to be understood without offering understanding in return. And yet he stayed, not because love made it easy, but because love made it worth the effort. It is not enough to feel deeply. The Stoics remind us that virtue, courage, justice, temperance, wisdom, is the only good. Everything else is neutral unless used in service of virtue. This includes love. He began to see her not as someone to complete him or someone to depend upon, but as someone before whom he could practice virtue honestly. Could he be patient in disagreement? Could he speak with kindness even in disappointment? Could he admire her strength without growing resentful? Could he love her fiercely, yet without needing her to heal every wound within him? Every glance, every word, every silence between them became part of the test. And the beautiful irony was this: the more he treated love as a test of virtue, the more joy he found in it, because in loving her with awareness, with reasoned intention, he became more of himself. She did not demand he be perfect, only present. She did not ask for sacrifice, but sincerity. Her fire did not burn him, because he learned to meet it not with fear or control, but with steadiness. And what a revelation that was, to see that love, far from being a distraction from the philosophical life, was one of its purest expressions. For what greater challenge is there than to remain just when we are hurt, to remain temperate when we are longing, to remain wise when our emotions try to pull us under? In her, he found not a comfort zone, but a mirror. And in that mirror, virtue was either affirmed or found lacking. He did not always pass the test, but he kept showing up for it, not because he had to, but because he knew that to love well was to live rightly. And in the quiet depths of that fire, he began to understand what it meant to love not merely with passion, but with principle. There are fires that destroy, and there are fires that illuminate. Most are drawn to the flame that blazes outward, the dramatic, the visible, the loud energy that announces itself to the world. But the Stoic does not chase spectacle. He looks for the quiet fire, the one that burns steadily within. When he fell for the fire in her eyes, it was not because it dazzled him with heat. It was because it revealed an inner world, a clarity, a depth that called to something just as sacred within himself. Many mistake intensity for purpose. They see passion and assume it must be meaningful, but fire without direction is chaos. Emotion without discipline is noise. Her fire, however, was of a different kind. It wasn't the reckless spark of someone who simply wanted to be seen. It was the flame of someone who had seen herself, who had faced silence, who had questioned deeply, who had chosen to burn, not to consume, but to become. He realized there is a profound difference between the fire that attracts and the fire that endures. The former is what most people chase, a storm of feelings, a rush of adrenaline, a fever mistaken for love. But the latter, the enduring fire, is rooted in conviction, in vision, in inner peace that refuses to be disturbed by the opinions of others. Her eyes did not scream for attention, they held it effortlessly, because they reflected not a need to prove, but a knowing, a settled, powerful presence forged in her own solitude. And so, his falling for her was not a surrender to chaos, but a submission to truth. Her presence challenged him not with unpredictability, but with consistency. She did not burn like wildfire, she burned like a hearth, warm, centered, unwavering. Her fire was not something to be feared or tamed, it was to be respected. Not because it threatened, but because it asked for equal inner strength in return. He began to notice the fire within himself, the one he had long neglected in pursuit of external victories, public approval, fleeting distractions. Her steadiness forced him to confront his own flickering focus, his undisciplined emotions, his moments of quiet desperation. She did not demand he match her fire. She simply showed what it looked like to carry one with honor. The Stoics speak of the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty of the soul, the inner command center guided by reason. To protect it is to tend the inner flame, and here was someone who had done so, someone whose eyes did not flash with random intensity, but with vision. She did not burn outwards to impress the world, she radiated inward to light her own path, and in her light he saw how far he had to go, not to win her, but to meet her in that place of clarity. The world is filled with fires that fade, but the fire within, when cultivated, protected, and tempered by reason, can endure. That was the fire he saw in her eyes, and so he did not fall for her in haste. He fell in reflection, drawn not by spectacle, but by strength. The kind of strength that says, I have walked through storms and chosen peace. I have known pain and chosen compassion. I have faced the world and remained whole. Her fire did not threaten to consume him. It invited him to awaken, to rise, to return to himself, and for that he did not merely fall, he bowed. He did not fall for her beauty alone. Beauty fades, shifts, and deceives. What drew him in, what truly arrested his soul, was something more enduring, something the Stoics called arete, the excellence of character, the quiet dignity of someone who strives to live well, rightly, and in accordance with reason. In a world that celebrates surface and speed, it is rare to encounter someone who lives by principle, who guards their values like sacred flame. Yet that is what he saw in her, not just charm or charisma, but a kind of inner alignment. She moved through life with intention, she spoke with clarity. Her choices were not dictated by impulse, but carved from self-knowledge, and in her presence he found himself pulled not merely by desire, but by aspiration. Eros, the passionate longing that pulls one toward another, is often misunderstood. It is too often reduced to chemistry or craving, but the Stoics knew better. Eros, when guided by reason, can elevate the soul. It can be the spark that reminds us we are not only flesh, but fire, called not just to feel, but to grow. To love well is not to surrender to emotion, but to see in another the reflection of what we, too, might become. She made him want to be better, not for her approval, but because her very existence reminded him of the person he once hoped to be. Her integrity was not loud, it was quiet and constant. She did not boast of her strength, it simply revealed itself in how she treated others, how she listened, how she said no when the world pressed her to compromise. In her, virtue was not a word, it was a rhythm. He found himself watching more carefully, speaking more thoughtfully, choosing more deliberately, not because he was trying to impress her, but because being around someone who lived with such clarity made anything less feel hollow. She didn't need him to change, but love, in its truest form, often makes us want to align ourselves with our highest self. It is a mirror that shows not just how we are, but how we could be. It was in this merging of eros and arete that their connection deepened. They were not two halves seeking completion, they were whole beings seeking alignment, and in that space between passion and virtue, something rare emerged: respect. Not the kind built on status or admiration, but the kind that grows in silence, in shared values, in watching someone act with kindness when no one else is watching. She did not dazzle him with perfection. She invited him into a shared discipline of thought, of love, of living. When he faltered, she didn't shame him, she reminded him. When he succeeded, she didn't flatter him, she challenged him to keep going. Love, then, became a kind of training ground, a place to practice patience, humility, forgiveness, and strength. And in every moment they shared, there was the hum of something greater than emotion, the practice of virtue through relationship. And so he came to understand what the Stoics hinted at all along, that the most enduring love is not built on passion alone, but on shared purpose, that to truly fall for someone is not to lose oneself, but to become more fully who you are meant to be. And that in loving someone who embodies arete, we do not just love them, we love the good itself made visible through them. That was her fire, that was what he fell for. He looked into her eyes and saw something untamed, something that could never be held, only honored. The fire in her gaze was not an invitation to possess, but a call to witness, to admire without clutching, to love without needing. And in that moment, he remembered what the Stoics had always taught. The things we love most deeply are never ours to own. We are stewards, not masters. We walk alongside, not above. The world teaches us to grasp, to turn beauty into ownership, affection into control, and love into a contract. But Stoic wisdom demands something harder, something nobler. It asks us to love fully while holding loosely. It reminds us that nothing external, no person, no moment, no feeling, can truly be ours. All things change. All people are on their own path. And love, if it is to be real, must respect this truth. He did not want to dim her fire. He did not seek to shape her into a version that suited his comfort. He loved her because she was whole on her own, unapologetic, fierce, free. To try and possess her would be to distort what made her beautiful in the first place. And so he chose a higher path, to love her presence while accepting the impermanence of all things, to say, "I am grateful for you," instead of "you are mine." That too was a form of strength. To look at someone and know they could leave, that they are not obligated to stay, and still choose to love them fully, without armor, is perhaps one of the deepest expressions of Stoic courage. He did not bind his happiness to her presence, but allowed her presence to inspire his happiness. That is the essence of amor fati, the love of fate, not resignation, but reverence. He did not ask for guarantees. He asked for the privilege of witnessing her fire, for however long the universe allowed. There is a kind of freedom in that kind of love, a quiet, expansive freedom that doesn't suffocate. In it, there are no demands, no ultimatums, only gratitude and attentiveness. He learned to see each moment with her as a gift, not a right. Every conversation, every glance, every silence shared between them became more precious because none were assumed. He lived with her in the way one watches a sunset, not trying to hold the light, but simply being present while it lasts. And in this practice of non-possession, his love deepened. It became less about what he felt and more about what he offered: presence, respect, space. She never had to earn his affection, nor did she owe him anything for it. She was free, and that freedom made her love all the more meaningful. Because when she chose to stay, he knew it was a choice, not a debt, not an obligation, but a truth arising from her own fire. This kind of love is rare. It is disciplined, it demands the taming of ego, the stilling of fear, the softening of control, but it is the only love that endures because it is built on something immovable, respect for the autonomy of another soul. So he loved her not as a possession, but as a presence, not as something to claim, but as something to cherish, and in doing so, he found a strange and beautiful paradox. The less he tried to hold on, the more fully she came alive beside him. That is what the fire in her eyes taught him, not just how to love, but how to let love live freely. When he fell for the fire in her eyes, it did not feel like a collapse. It was not the unraveling of self into another, nor a losing of balance into chaos. It was something quieter, something richer, a kind of rising that began from within. The world often speaks of falling in love as if it were a plunge, a descent into sweet disorientation, but this was not that. This was the soul, recognizing something familiar and sacred in another, and standing taller because of it. The Stoics taught that the goal of life is not pleasure or conquest, but virtue, and virtue, when nurtured properly, lifts the soul upward, toward wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. To fall for her, then, was not a step away from his path, but a deeper walk upon it. Her presence didn't weaken his clarity, it sharpened it. She did not distract him from his purpose, she reminded him of it. There was something about the fire in her eyes that stirred the parts of himself he had long kept quiet, the hopes he had buried under reason, the gentleness he had set aside for discipline, the strength he had guarded too carefully. In her gaze he saw not only a woman, but a kind of mirror, not a reflection of what he was, but of what he could be. And so the falling became a rise, not because she lifted him, but because she made him want to rise on his own. Love, when rooted in respect and clarity, does not dissolve us into another. It deepens our understanding of the self. She did not ask him to change, but in loving her, he changed all the same, not for her, but because of her. He began to notice the way she moved through the world, not driven by validation or ambition, but by purpose. She seemed lit from within, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that inspired reverence. Her fire did not say, "Look at me." It said, "See clearly," and in seeing her clearly, he saw himself more honestly. The ancient Stoics would have understood this. They knew that every encounter, every trial, every joy is a test of the soul's preparedness. She was not a test he needed to pass, but she revealed the state of his readiness. Could he love without losing himself? Could he admire without envy? Could he desire without demand? Her presence asked for his courage, not the outward kind, but the internal bravery to be open, to be still, to be sincere, to show up not with polished armor, but with real skin. It is no small thing to be seen without defense. And yet that is what her fire called forth in him, a kind of honesty, a kind of quiet boldness he didn't know he was capable of. To fall in this way was to return to the self, not to escape it. It was a rising into alignment between thought and feeling, body and soul, logic and love. She did not complete him, she reawakened what was already there, waiting to be lit. And so, while the world might say he fell, he would say otherwise. He stood taller than ever before. Not because of what she gave him, but because of what her fire reminded him to give himself, direction, depth, and the freedom to love without fear. It was not a fall, it was a becoming, and so he did not fall in the way the world imagines. He did not lose himself in her, nor did he seek to bind her fire to his own will. He loved her not because she completed a missing part of him, but because she awakened what had always been there, waiting, patient, hidden beneath the layers of fear, pride, and forgetting. Her fire was not a blaze to be tamed, but a light to be honored. It tested his virtue, refined his patience, and mirrored the kind of man he was still learning to become. In loving her, he did not surrender his reason. He aligned it with passion. He discovered that real love, the kind that endures, lives not in possession, but in presence, not in control, but in courage. He fell for her fire, but in doing so, he rose in his soul. And if that is not the essence of love and philosophy, alike to be moved by another, and yet return more deeply to yourself, then what is? Let the world chase beauty. Let it seek to hold what cannot be held. But let us instead honor the fire when we find it, in others, in ourselves, and rise with it, not to consume, but to become.